good morning and good afternoon to all of you. It's a great pleasure to have you here, and I would like to thank all of you to join our session that is part of the cycle that is well known in the WPC family, is the refining challenges of the European industry. And this is part of this cycle. You know that we started in 2013, so this is the third edition. And this is something in advance that what we are going to have in the spring of the next year. So welcome to everyone. First, I would like to thank all our distinguished speakers, and very special thanks to the president of the Spanish Energy Club, Mavi Zingoni, that is going to launch the discussion. And after that, I would like to have a very warm thank you to our president, the president of the WPC, Tor Feiran, that is also going to launch the discussions later. So I will not take more time. So first, please, Mavi, would you take the floor and launch this webinar? Thank you.
Sure, Pedro, thank you, and good day to all of you, and thank you for joining us today. President of the WPC, Tor Feiran, the speakers from API, the Gulf Upstream Association, Fuels Europe, AOP, and also Pedro as moderator from Repsol and the Spanish committee from the WPC, and in general members of the WPC community. Welcome everybody, and thank you all of you for being here today. I'm very pleased to welcome you to this virtual event organized by the Spanish Committee of the World Petroleum Council and the Spanish Energy Club. And I also like to thank you, our sponsor, Repsol, of this edition. First of all, as always in these virtual events, we would have learned to have this session in a physical way. However, the pandemic is not allowing us to do that. So I want to express my support and my gratitude for all those who are now being very affected by the pandemic, and all my best wishes with you and to go across all these difficult times that we are going right now. It's a great honor as president of Energy Club to open this event. Moreover, having in mind that the WPC is an organization that we feel very close to, especially since we organized the 19th World Petroleum Council back in 2008 in Madrid. During all these years, we have been working very hard to encourage the Spanish energy community to participate in all these activities, and also to attract, as we are doing today, the international experts to shed light on what is happening in the global arena. As I mentioned, what we are doing with this with the discussion in this session. This session that we're going to have is a very good example of it. And this webinar, as Pedro explained before, is part of the expert workshop cycle, challenges of the European refining industry, probably more important today than ever before. And as Pedro mentioned, was launched back in 2013 by the Spanish National Committee of the WPC. And I'm sure that we are going to have the annual meeting or the main meeting in the spring next year. At this time, COVID-19 is having an unprecedented impact around the world from a health, social, and also economic standpoint. If we talk specifically about the oil and gas industry, regional and national lockdowns have resulted in a very important loss of demand, along with commodities, in special oil, very low oil prices, and many other future uncertainties that we are living today with. Despite the difficulties, the energy industry has been supplying energy whenever and wherever was needed, and at the same time adapting to continue providing traditional and new products and services to help the society to fight against the pandemic. All this while increasing its commitment towards reaching net zero emissions economy. And I think all this is a reason to be very proud of. Refineries, as I said recently, are probably facing the biggest challenge ever. We all know that business as usual it's difficult to have them back, will not be returning. However, the refining industry is an industry which is used to working together in order to find innovative solutions to overcome the different difficulties that we have all across the journey. All refineries are establishing new strategies to adapt to this new reality. In the case of Europe, and specifically in the case of Spain, they are contributing with solutions to reach the objectives defined by the Green Deal towards a more decarbonized economy laid by the Vision 2050 pathway, synthetic fuels, green hydrogens, e-fuels, etc. I think that the debates and the discussions that will come up today will help us all understand which are the main consequences that this pandemic is having on the worldwide refining industry. It will also let us review the different strategies that are being developed to overcome them, whilst taking care of the refinery assets and also the workforces that are very important. It will help us learn from each other, and most important, it will help us find the best way to continue providing energy in a sustainable, affordable, and secure way. I would like to finish by thanking Pedro Miras, Vice President of the WPC and Chairman of its Spanish committee, for all the work that you are doing, Pedro, and also the whole Spanish committee for the excellent job that you are going ahead with. Thanks to Repsol also for the sponsorship, and a big thank you for the whole WPC community, especially to its President, Tor Feiran, for accepting our invitation and being with us today. Tor, I hope we get a chance to meet in person very, very soon. And now I leave the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, Maria. And good afternoon and good morning to all of you. Thank you for inviting me to speak on behalf of WPC. You are always active. The Spanish National Committee is always active, and I really appreciate your initiatives in that respect. And we meet at extremely dynamic and challenging times to all of us. The world and the energy industry have, for the last 10 months at least, experienced, and we are still experiencing, dramatic times and considerable challenges. We have experienced low, and in some cases, negative commodity prices, and also dramatic consequences of the COVID-19 virus outbreak. But despite that, we still need to look forward, but also think about energy transition, climate change, geopolitics, and all the other issues that we share around the world. The question now is really, what will the recovery from this situation look like? When will it happen? How will it happen? And what will drive it? We don't know what the future holds, but I think we have to be prepared for a new reality that might be different from what we were used to. We had some hopes for a recovery over the summer, but now we see once again, we experience a second wave with lockdowns, at least all over Europe, again impacting all areas of society, including the markets for our products. We are now putting all our hopes into one or more effective vaccines, and hopefully will be the instrument that we need to fight this virus. The question is when the entire world can be safe again to organize conferences and congresses. For over 85 years, WPC has witnessed the ups and downs of oil price. As an industry, we always managed through this, as regardless of price, because there has always been demand. Listening to our 60 plus member countries, the issue of energy transition and climate impact will continue to be high on the agenda for the industry and for WPC going forward. But company and government policies will decide on the pace and investment level. In our industry, innovation and technology has always been a game changer. And we should also expect that to be the case for the future in all segments of our business. The great challenge of this 21st century is developing an energy system that protects the environment while at the same time advancing human prosperity. To achieve this, the energy mix must satisfy all the three key audits, meaning reliability, affordability, and sustainability. All segments of society, from consumers to investors, will play an important role in determining the energy mix by influencing allocation of financial, human, but also political capital across different energy sources. I think ESG is a good way for companies to demonstrate in a transparent way the reality behind what we are doing. Once again, talking to our members, we can see that project finance for new oil and gas initiatives will continue to be difficult. However, they also believe that you also need to invest in profitable oil and gas industry to help fund the energy transition. Many governments and companies are looking at green hydrogen and alcohol-based economies for the future, which all need large financial investments. We must recognize that we still will see a fast-growing global population, and the stability of the global economy is underpinned by affordable energy. WPC's role is to create arenas for dialogue between all stakeholders, addressing all these relevant to the time context issues. This webinar is one of them, addressing the impact of COVID-19 on the refining industry. And I want to express my thanks to the Spanish WPC National Committee and Club Español de Energía for the initiative to organize it. Thank you, and I wish you a successful webinar.
Thank you very much. And before starting with the dialogue with our speakers, I would like to say thank you again to Tor and to Mavi for joining us and to be here today and to launch this discussion. Thank you for coming here, and it's a pleasure to have on board always. I think we have to start with the dialogue, and first let me introduce our speakers of today. First is Ron Chittim. He's a vice president of the downstream policy at the American Petroleum Institute. Has a long career of more than 30 years with a lot of different responsibilities over the world. And now he's responsible for managing the policy development and implementation in the fuels market and refining sector of the oil and gas industry. He has a degree in petroleum engineering from the University of Wyoming. Ron, thank you very much for joining us today. We have also Raj Jajaria, technical manager of the Gulf Downstream Association. He has a bachelor technician with gold medalist in the petroleum engineering for the Indian Institute of Technology, and holds also project manager professional and other relevant postgraduate certificates. Has more than 40 years of experience, 35 of which he spent in ADNOC in various different capacities, covering the entire spectrum of the oil and gas operations. He's now his current role is to oversee the function of 10 technical committees and steering several initiatives under the umbrella of the Gas Downstream Association to create different platforms to share knowledge, experience, and best practice among the members. Thank you, Raj, for coming here. We have also John Cooper, General Manager of Flows Europe and Concagua. He took this position in April 2015. And he started his career in the motor industry, working on future powertrains, and after 3 years moved to the downstream. So he has close to 27 years of experience in the sector. His previous role was Director of Renewables Energy Downstream, leading BP's commercial and compliance strategy for renewables regulation. He has a bachelor in engineering from the Cambridge University. Thank you, John, for being here with us. And we have also Luis Aires Dupré, President of the Spanish Association of Petroleum Products. He started his career in BP in 1991 in the refinery of Castellón. And since then, he has held several positions in Madrid, Brussels, London, and the USA. And now he's the president, the current president of the BP Spain, of BP Spain. He's also vice president of strategy and portfolio of BP Europe and Africa. He is also a member of the board of the Spanish Energy Club, as you know, member of the board of Pan American Energy Group, and president of EOP, the Spanish Association of Petroleum Products Operators. So we have a wonderful, extremely good panel for discussing today. So I would like to have a fresh dialogue here today, and I would like to open several blocks and several things that we have to reflect. And my first question is for John Cooper. We have to understand what is the nature of this crisis, because prices have collapsed, consumption has collapsed, and many things that we are not able to understand. John, what would you say in order to understand what kind of crisis are we facing at? Is it a normal crisis? Is it something different? What's your opinion about?
Well, I think in my experience in 30 years actually of our industry, it's nothing like we've ever had before. What happened started in Europe around February and March. It happened very quickly. It happened in a very uneven way, both in terms of the geography and also in terms of the different sectors that were affected. Of course, looking back, it seems strange that it happened so fast and in such an unexpected way. We knew that there was a pandemic, or at least a virus, in China, and then we saw in Italy the numbers of cases rise. But then it came out of Italy into other parts of Europe, Austria first, but then France, Belgium, UK, and suddenly within weeks, it was apparent to governments that there had to be a really severe shutdown. And what that meant for us was rapid demand destruction. People were no longer traveling to work. Aviation perhaps being the biggest shock of all, where jet demand really was down almost immediately, down 97%. And that meant that the movement of products was suddenly difficult. The assumptions we'd made about changing from winter gasoline to summer gasoline suddenly were invalid. And we had a lot of immediate operational difficulties, including things like, how do we have drivers, service crews, travel across borders? Because we also saw the mechanisms of the European Union and the single market breaking down, with every country suddenly making emergency rules that where business was not consulted. We didn't have access to PPE, we didn't have access to testing. It was a crisis like nothing else we've seen in my 30 years in the industry so far. Since then, we've come to terms and understood it a little better. We still see jet demand down very dramatically, much lower than we've ever seen before. Gasoline demand is also down, diesel not so much, but then it's different across countries as well. Central and Eastern Europe was less affected by North and West Europe and Southwest Europe. And while we saw 60 to 70% demand destruction in Western Europe, Central and Eastern saw more like 50%. But again, it's uneven. So uneven, unexpected, we're learning as we look back, but it's not gone away. And then, of course, refining margins have been horrible, negative in some cases, and the normal dynamics of the market, with us being short diesel, long gasoline, are now very, very distorted a long way from that. We already see some announcements around unit closing in refineries in Europe. The latest one was yesterday, Grangemouth, Petroineos, but there have been several others, capacity being mothballed or potentially taken out permanently. So quite a shocking picture, still evolving for us.
Thank you, John. Just one thing that I have not said. Those that are connected with us can send their questions. We will have 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the session in order to answer the questions from the audience. Ron, is also for you the first time that you see some kind of crisis like this, or is similar to others in the past?
Well, somewhat similar to what was mentioned previously, that we have seen, an great upheaval. And in some ways, this is kind of a one in 100 year situation. But I think we all realize, our industry has been through booms and bust cycles before, and in some ways, some of the economic fundamentals remained generally solid. Um, John mentioned the winter to summer fuel switchover, and at least here in the U.S., we would normally get the fuel waivers needed, maybe on a state by state basis because of a regional disruption, for instance, from a hurricane or something like that. But this is the first time we ever had to get fuel waivers across the entire United States. So again, in some ways, we have been through ups and downs before, but in a lot of ways, this is unprecedented. Um, However, I think our oil and gas industry and the highly skilled and dedicated workforce is very resilient. That's one thing we pride ourselves on across the industry, is we're very resilient and able to withstand all kinds of hurdles put in the way, and actually, we're preparing and looking for a prosperous future. Just to give you a snapshot of more recent data, the U.S. petroleum demand is down to about 18.4 million barrels a day. So it's down about 11% from a year ago. Crude oil production's at 10.5 million barrels a day. And maybe of more interest to this crowd, to this audience, is refinery utilization is right now at about 75% in the U.S. versus normally would be about 86% year on year. So, still feeling the pain of the pandemic. Unusual in a lot of ways, but in some ways it's another situation of the ups and downs of the industry.
This is a dramatic situation. Rush, you have the same feeling? You have something different to say about this?
Thank you, Pedro, and thank you all the panelists, and my hello to all the viewers. I am truly honored to be part of this prestigious event. Um, Before I come to the impact on our refining industry, I would like to highlight three important criteria of this crisis, which I would truly call a black swan event. And as truly has been put forward by John and Ron, it is like once in 100 years kind of crisis. So what are the unique characteristics I note? Hardly anyone has been left untouched in the world. People to people connections have been greatly disrupted. And the biggest casualty I see are the young minds. The young minds today see people not embracing, not shaking hand, wearing masks. These impressions are going to remain for a very long time on their minds when they grow up and take the positions of leaders and workers in our society. I see a great challenge going forward to mold those minds and to bring them and rehabilitate into normal situation. And the last thing which I see in this crisis is, along with the pandemic, there is something called infodemic. There is a lot of information floating around in different media. Thanks to the power of technology, we have got so many views, and there is so much polarization around the world across every subject. Should we wear the mask? Should we not wear the mask? Is CO2 good? Is not good? All kind of subjects you can talk about, and there are polarization. These are some of the unique characteristics of this crisis I haven't seen. Coming to our industry, what I see, there has been a sudden destruction of demand, almost sudden, overnight. We stopped consuming more than 20 million barrels of oil per day. And then what happened? Suddenly, HR, human resource, stopped coming to the operations. The operations which require human suddenly have to do without uh, more than what we needed. It was almost down to 50% in some cases. And that has impacted the delay in preventive maintenance, T&I, and so many operations. The regular operations which would take a week now takes 1 month. And what has happened is it has increased the potential for the breakdown. And these are some of the challenges which probably we will see in days to come and months to come. And last but not the least, it's very, very sorry situation. One of our member company reported that before the crisis, they used to get 1 or 2 condolences in 2 or 3 weeks. Now they get 3 or 4 condolences for deaths every day. We are losing people, we are losing friends, we are losing experts in this crisis. Some of these are really heart-wrenching.
Yes, it is. It is. You're 100% agree with you, Luis. I would like to have your point of view about this crisis, and also to jump to the next part of our discussion is about the effects. If the effect of the business is very similar all over the world, or you think that there are different point of views depending on the regions. I am speaking about reduction of runs in the refinery, margins, and closure of refineries on unemployment. So, please, would you connect these two things? What about your perception of this crisis, and if it's different from one part to others in the world?
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thanks a lot, Pedro, for the invitation to be part of this very, very interesting panel. So starting with your first question in terms of the impact on Spain, I think it's worth comparing with the last time we had a crisis in our country that was affecting demand of oil products. That was back in 2008 at the time of the financial crisis, and that was affecting very, very hard demand of oil in Southern Europe and in Spain in particular. But the big difference was the time it took to have that hit in our oil demand. I mean, when we had the crisis back in 2008, the demand for oil went down by 25% in a period of 5 years, 2008 to 2013. And that gave us in the industry, the refining industry, really the time to react. And the way we reacted in the refining industry was through additional investment. So we invested really in order to make the Spanish refineries more competitive. And in that period of time, when volumes were going down in the local market, we invested a total of $7 billion in that period. What is happening now, John has mentioned that the speed of the crisis is brutal. And also we still do not understand well what is going to be the enduring consequences of this crisis in our market. If I talk now a little bit about your second question, which is if the impact on the business could be different from a region to region. Well, first of all, I think that as we all will agree, we are in a business, the refining business, which is a global business. So a refinery which is based in Spain, it's competing with refineries anywhere in the world. They could be placing their production in a Spanish import terminal in a matter of a few days. So we are in a global business and we are competing with refineries all over the place. But having said that, the impact of the demand has been probably in Spain larger than in other European geographies. I mean, at the time of the most severe lockdown in Spain, which was the second half of April, we had ground fuels demand, the demand for diesel and gasoline, it went down by 80% in the second half of April. And then as the restrictions on mobility and as the economic activity started to gradually reopen and recover, we had a 5% recovery week after week. So, I mean, to put it in perspective, so suddenly 80% of the volume went off. We had 20% of the volume that we had a year ago, and then week after week, we had a 5% recovery, which was great at the time. The issue was that when we reached 85% of the volume that we had last year, around the summer, we didn't have any further recovery. So it was as if we were touching a ceiling. that left us with a gap of 15% compared to a year ago from a volume perspective. But what is more concerning is the fact that now that we have this second wave of a pandemic, volumes are starting to go down again because of mobility restrictions, and we are back into a gap compared to a year ago of 20-25%, and still a lot of uncertainty about the future. So then the question is, what has been the response of the Spanish refining industry to these movements in the demand? Well, I think that it's different, the response in 2Q and the response in the second half of the year. In the second quarter, I think that refinery runs, they were relatively high. I mean, as an average, the throughput cuts, they were of only 20%, relatively small compared to the volume drop. Margins, refining margins, they were still positive. And the Spanish refining system, we were placing our production into exports. Most of our refineries, they are coastal ones, or we were building inventory. But that totally changed in the second half of the year. Now, in the second half of the year, we are really suffering from the negative economic consequences of this crisis. It has already been mentioned. Refining margins have been zero or negative. This is driving run cuts. Some of them, they can be quite significant for the least competitive refineries. None of the Spanish refineries has been temporarily shut down. Employment levels have been kept, but as you can imagine, the situation is really very, very tough. And we are all in response mode. We are trying to cut costs, and we are trying to respond to a very, very tough situation. I think that we still don't know, as I said earlier, on what is going to be the enduring impact. I like to compare this to a tsunami. So we had a tsunami coming in, destroying a lot of demand in the second quarter. Now the sea level is starting to go down. As the sea level goes down, we start to see what is the enduring impact in the economy and what is the impact on the refining industry. But I believe that it is likely that we will have to go through some type of rationalization in refining capacity worldwide.
Okay, thank you, Luis. Rash, do you have the same feeling from the point of view of the refineries in Middle East, or do you think there's something different here?
Right. I think on many counts, I quite agree with Louis. However, as you know, that in the GCC, where I'm based, and also our association works with our members, uh, uh, most of the refineries are owned by the national oil companies, and they serve a lot of domestic demands, and they are governed by the government directives. So we are kind of driven more by the many factors, not just the market and supply, demand and supply. I'm happy to say that there has been no closure of any refinery in this part of the world. I have not heard of anyone except one small refinery of 15,000 barrels in one corner, up for sale. The throughput, as Louis said, definitely was hardly impacted initially because they were building the inventory, and it was not reduced. And even now, even after the second part of this crisis, they are able to sustain the throughput. Maybe in some cases it has gone down by 10% to 30%. In some countries it has been completely no cut in throughput. But the margin is a different story. Margin has now gone negative. Some of the refinery who are only operating CDU with a hydro processing probably are not able to go beyond, I mean, they have gone to minus $6 per barrel because they are not able to get any high value product to the market. So that's something very worrying. And for all our members in the GCC, that's the high focus of attention. How do we revive the margin? How do we increase the margin? In fact, I'm happy to tell you that under GDA, we have a task for every technical committee to think of ways to improve the margin, whether it is by operational excellence, whether it is by technology, and even by managing the people. So we are open for all ideas and suggestions, and perhaps in the future we would come out with white papers and best practices which will help the entire refinery industry globally. Um, Also, I can tell you, manpower was not very affected in a great way. Yes, there were some layoffs, there were some restructuring, but then no mass scale layoffs. That was a very good news for our people. Government supported in a very big way. Almost, I can tell you in Bahrain, for example, Kingdom of Bahrain, government came forward to support, the nationals of Bahrain by paying their salary. So this reduced the burden on the operators. And this was a great, like that, every country provided some kind of stimulus. So the manpower was very little affected. And I can also share with you a couple of examples of some good work by our refiners and our members. For example, in Kuwait, there is a new company called Kipik, and that company is building one of the largest, you can say, refinery at present, refinery and petrochemical industry. It is 600 and plus barrels per day, and that's under commissioning, pre-commissioning at present. And that company built a quarantine center for the government for 1,600 inmates and 40 beds with self-contained staff quarters and all the clinics and labs just in 1 week. That's the potential of our expertise within oil and gas industry. We can do miracles with our expertise. The other example is Saudi Aramco, who collaborated and did a joint venture with John Hopkins Medicine a few years ago, came to a rescue. John Hopkins developed ways and means to transport people from home to work safely, and they developed many best practices to help people keep safe. So there are stories after stories to tell, but I would say, yes, it has been, we have fought the crisis and we are fighting the crisis.
Okay, thank you, Raj. Very interesting your point. I would like to ask Ron, because the United States is always recognized as very flexible industry, very flexible and resilient, and very fast to react with things are changing. Ron, do you think that the American refineries have done something different to others, or would you share an example about this, or what's your point of view about this?
Yeah. Well, first, as I mentioned in the other remarks, demand remains weak, and the commercial commitments are being filled through inventories, and there's actually very few signals right now necessitating that refinery runs will increase. The market is rebalancing, but the refineries have taken on different strategies. The latest count I had is about 10 refineries have actually closed for a total of about 1.2 million barrels a day. Some have chosen to just idle or temporarily close until the economic situation gets better. In others, and we'll talk about it later in a few of the other questions, are let's say they're going to be repurposed. Some companies have announced they're going to convert refineries over to renewable diesel or biofuels. So the companies, the refineries are trying to be innovative and think of ways to weather the situation. And only those refineries that are the least competitive are the ones that are targeted for closure. And the future will tell what may actually come of those, whether they get turned into terminals or maybe get bought up, in the future if that turns around. So there are things that companies are doing, but I think it is important to mention that as was mentioned earlier on some of the other remarks, this has been a very painful time, and with these refinery closures. Come job losses. Probably the largest one here in the U.S. recently was Shell mentioned the closure of their Convent, Louisiana refinery, which has about 700 workers and 400 contractors. So that's 1,100 jobs right there. And when times are already tough, and other independent refiners and even some of the larger integrated oil and gas companies have announced layoffs also. So there are things to do to be innovative and try to think about the best ways to weather the storm. But sometimes it just comes down to economics and which ones. I think we all recognize there's going to be rationalization not only in the U.S. but across the globe. And I think some of these, as mentioned, this has been hitting us pretty quick over the last 7 or 8 months, and there's been a few few refineries that are least competitive that have not weathered the storm on this one.
Okay, thank you, Ron. And John, just you're very close to Brussels, and Brussels has always very special idea about our sector, and you are very close to all the European refiners. Something to add here? Something that could be different?
Well, yes, of course. We represent the downstream oil industry to the European institutions, and so we have to follow very closely and provide feedback, engage, propose changes, etc. The European Green Deal was announced just before this pandemic, and the preparations for how to implement that have not slowed down throughout this whole process. The objective remains the same for getting Europe to climate neutrality by 2050, and the preparations for all the individual pieces of regulation are now being made for the 2030 targets and also later. But for all of them, the guiding principle is the regulations have to set a pathway towards that goal of climate neutrality in 2050. And the work of the Commission has been very clear that essentially there is almost no role for petroleum in fuels for transport by 2050. And certainly for road transport, they envisage zero role for petroleum. Now, the work that we've done in the association, as I know that many on the panel here are familiar with, we've described how we can transition a liquid by moving to new forms of feedstock based on wastes, residues, biomass, renewable electricity, and green hydrogen, together with manufacturing techniques that can be climate neutral. And we can make liquids that way that are climate neutral and gradually increase the volume. We're now focusing on the targets and the policies that we need to actually underpin those investments, because the investments are considerable, but we're now, at least for the short term, we're in an environment where it's going to be quite hard to put a case for an investment together. All investments obviously have to have a pathway of maybe 10 years or 15 years or something in which to break even. But right now, for the immediate future, our customers, those customers like trucking companies or airlines, have got severe financial difficulties. It's quite hard to imagine how you recoup the cost of an investment in renewable technology. So there's a lot going on. Can I also say, it's also clear we're not alone in this challenge. The chemicals industry, the steel industry, cement industries, and electricity industries are all being asked to do this transition. And we all support the objective, but actually making the business plan work is very, very challenging. So that's the focus of our work. And it involves working with the member states, including Spain, of course, to help make that plan come together. But it's a huge amount of work. We need some new ideas for different policies. And we also need to have, as an industry, the fuels industry come together to understand the emphasis has to change gradually, but surely, away from petroleum being the heart of this, instead to new technologies, new feedstocks, still around supplying some of the same customers, still supplying with a liquid, but a liquid made in a very different way. And it's a massive challenge. We think we can do it, but it's a huge amount of work in terms of policy as well as business strategy.
Okay, John. John, you have. Thank you for this very interesting address. And you have started to speak about investment, and this is the next question I want to launch all of you. But John, you have started with investment. You want to say something? What about investments, John?
Well, investments need demand to, you build a project to satisfy a demand. And so one of the first things we need is we need to actually have a clear path where customers will actually demand low carbon fuels. That's one of the first things. Secondly, we need some kind of stability in the regulation. In biofuels, first generation biofuels, those regulations changed. It seems like almost every 2 years that there was a change in the view of what was happening there. It made it very difficult for many companies. We do need a longer term view with clear stability. And there's also a link there to ESG. Investing was mentioned earlier. It's absolutely part of the future. And one of the concerns that we have is that the way the narrative about ESG is evolving is that sustainability and sustainable finance definitions, they favor the pure green startup, right, which is independent and starts with a completely green technology. It does not favor so much a large industry that makes steps. Each of those steps is actually maybe the same size as one of your startups, but it looks like a 2% change or a 3% change or a 4% change. Sustainable investing and ESG tends to favor the pure green startup, and it's going to be quite difficult for traditional industries that have got a pathway to get to be sustainable, but it looks incremental. And my concern is that that won't be recognized as a sustainable strategy, deserving the support that comes with that definition.
Thank you, Ron. Ron, please. What about investments? What could you share with us about your feeling about investments in the future?
Yeah, well, I think building on what John said and what I mentioned in my previous comments, I think it's certainly recognized here in the U.S. and by API and its member companies that there's certainly a movement towards lower carbon transportation fuels. That may actually get accelerated if Biden ends up ultimately wins the presidency. So there's clearly a role for lower carbon fuels in the future. The API has recently come up with climate principles and issue-specific frameworks, and we're working with our member companies to map out what those different pathways might be, whether they're fuel standards or their low carbon fuel standard or emission standards, things like that. But where we're coming from is more of a competitive and equitable transportation policy framework where all the different technologies can compete on a level playing field, whether it's hydrocarbon or biofuels, renewable diesel. We think that all the technologies and pathways should be able to compete, and that the marketplace and the consumer will dictate, how you get there and how fast you get there. But for instance, some of you may have seen that a month or two ago, the governor of California issued an executive order banning the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles by 2035. And New York and New Jersey are considering similar policies here in the U.S. I think our principles guide us to look at things that are not as picking winners and losers, but letting the different technologies play out. And there's a lot of research underway right now looking at very super efficient internal combustion engines. And so, why wouldn't those be able to compete equally with an EV or a hydrogen vehicle? So we've laid out our principles, and we're looking at all the options for different pathways. But kind of fundamentally, we believe that the marketplace and consumer choice should prevail, and also looking at these options, these pathways from life cycle analysis or well the wheels, where you look at the overall, the real CO2 abatement costs, and not just costs of what the government has to pay on a million ton per CO2 basis, which may not be the most efficient or cost-effective way to get there.
Thank you. And Raj, what do you think about investments in the future? Something different?
Yes, Pedro. Let me take the cue from John. Investment is directly proportional to demand. You invest where there is demand or there is likely to be demand in the future. You don't make investment based on current demand. You invest based on future demand. Now, what will be the future demand is like looking into crystal ball. Everyone has different opinion. Everyone has different projections. Uh, have we gone beyond the oil peak? Is it still to come? Uh, would all the electric vehicles replace IC? We don't know. Everyone has different opinion. Our view is based on what we know. We know that as of now, the global net refining capacity is set to increase by 5.7 million barrels per day by 2024, based on many new projects which have been implemented in the last few years and are still in the pipeline. Majority of it is coming from Middle East and Asia. In the GCC itself or in the Middle East itself, we are going to have almost 17% increase in refining capacity from 11.6 to 13.6 million barrels by 2024. And this increase is being led by, I am happy to announce, our member companies within the GCC. Kuwait, I mentioned to you about KIPEC, 615,000 barrels per day. Saudi, there is a Al Zour refinery, which is coming up also, 470,000 barrels per day. And then there is something in Iraq, which is 310,000 barrels per day. So all of this indicate that there is investment already in the industry, which is not going to go away. And the refining capacity increase is indicative of a global increase in demand as we go forward. We must not forget 1 billion people on earth still don't have access to energy. Then there are huge population which will be rising from poverty level to upper middle class, and their energy demand will also increase, and overall the population is going to increase. All of this will fuel the demand. Now, today, nearly 80% of the energy demand for the global is met by hydrocarbon, fossil fuel. It is, for me, it is impossible to think that in the next 2 or 3 decades, it will all be replaced by renewable. Uh, and there are expert opinions that even by 2050, hydrocarbon and fossil fuel will dominate the energy scene in one way or the other. Yes, we need to make investment in the clean fuel. We need to produce more low carbon intensity gasoline, diesel, fuel oil. We need to, divert a lot of our investment into carbon capture. So those investments will go. And also people are investing at present to increase the flexibility of their operations. So there is a lot of investment going into the bottom of the barrel upgrade. And digitalization, we should not forget. This pandemic, if any one thing it has taught us, how important and crucial is the digitalization. And there is going to be an intense investment into this area. So I would say there is a lot of, scope for investment. And in fact, in the GCC, all our NOCs are hopeful to attract the attention of the global investors to come and make investment in the GCC.
Okay, it's a very interesting and good message. Luis, you told us at the very beginning of the session that in Spain we invest 7,000 million euros in the last crisis. Do you think it's something that is going to happen in this now, or what's your perception about investment?
Well, one of the largest shifts that we are starting to see in Spain when we talk about commercial projects is that we see many announcements coming in terms of potential investments that will be in support of the energy transition. We're talking about advanced biofuel plants, green hydrogen projects, pilot plants for e-fuels. So I think that the appetite is there. But as it has already been said, I mean, it needs to make economic sense. So some of these technologies, like for instance, biofuels, from an economic point of view, they are viable. I have no doubts that these investments will go ahead at a scale, and they are going to be making a difference as part of the transition. However, other technologies like green hydrogen or, for instance, e-fuels, I mean, they are not viable yet. So I think that what we need is to have in Europe and in Spain in particular a framework that can make those investments really viable investments. I think it starts with having the confidence, the investors having the confidence that the government and the parliament is going to be providing regulation that will be supporting those investments. But we need to have some mechanisms to incentivize the investments, particularly in the absence of demand. We believe that probably the best mechanism, incentive, is to have a framework that really reflects the cost of CO2. And that makes that some of these technologies that today they are not profitable, in the future with a cost of CO2, they will become profitable. And then that's a very good incentive. That's an incentive that if it was applied across all the different sectors in the economy, would be in line with what Ron was saying about allowing all the different technologies to compete amongst themselves, and then the most efficient ones will be winning. And that's good for the economies, that's good as well for the citizens, because that will be a way to guarantee that the most efficient technologies from a cost point of view will be the winners. And then that will help and that will support the decarbonization of energy and the decarbonization of the economy. And I have doubts about when that mechanism of CO2 cost will be in place. I mean, we've been talking about it for many years, particularly in Europe, but these things are not easy to get implemented. But there are other mechanisms that could be implemented, like, for instance, for every investment that you do to develop technology, which is going to be reducing CO2, if the credits of that CO2 reduction could be sold at a fixed price, a price that really makes this project a project that makes sense from an economic point of view, that in itself could be an incentive to start developing this technology. So government support is going to be very important if we want these investments really to kick off, and if we want them to become really material investments.
No, thank you. And you have just launched the next item I would like you to discuss. It's about regulation, and I have a double question for all of you. One is, do you think it's necessary to change any regulation in order to face what has happened during this year, probably in the next, due to COVID? And the second question is, do you think that the regulators are going to launch additional measures that are always not very friendly with the refining sector in the future, independent of the necessity, or just facing what they think is the future for energy? So what about regulation? Rash, do you have an approach from the Middle East and in general your area?
Sure. Pedro, we need, first of all, a very tighter fuel specification. We are suffering from that. We need to establish more tighter fuel specification, more green specification, and also we need to set up energy efficiency standards. Right now, people are doing on a voluntary basis on their own, for their own good. But industry-wise, I think there is some requirement for setting up energy efficiency standards globally, which can be benchmarked against. And I know people use energy intensity index, but still I think we need, we need to have boilers performing at the most efficient energy specs. So we need to develop that. And then, although in the GCC, some private participation has already been encouraged by introducing a concept called in-country value, ICV. As you might be aware that in the UAE and Saudi, there is a requirement for any contract or any bidder to have certain percentage of in-country value investment in terms of people, in terms of manufacturing, which will generate the jobs and enrich the economy. Perhaps we need some kind of regulation to promote this private sector globally, and so that whenever anyone is operating in any country, that country's economy also benefit from that investment. Then there are some futuristic thoughts I have. The remote operations and virtual working policies. I do not see this disappearing anytime soon, and perhaps it might remain forever with us. So we need certain good practice, good policies, best practices which anyone can apply. Right now, everyone is doing or reinventing the wheel in their own way. Um, and we at GDA, we are trying to develop some best practices around that. Um, Geopolitics is almost like a unknown unknown. We don't know tomorrow who will tweet what and what will its impact be on the global scene. Uh, Perhaps we need some kind of regulation to regulate the outreach of the customers in different countries. These geopolitics can disturb those relationships, and we need some kind of safeguard. We need some kind of safety, security for the operators to reach out to their customers in different countries and not suddenly get broken up by geopolitics. Traveling and large scale congregation. I heard the president of WPC saying that we wish we will meet soon in the person and have the conference in person. I think that's definitely desired by everyone, but till that time we need policies. We need strict policies for traveling and congregation. It will help. uh, and last but not the least, I would like to have some regulation to control the spread of infodemic. Today, communication channels are being exploited. Can we have some standard? Can we have some regulation where nothing escapes from the regulator's eyes and is spread into the masses, creating unnecessary confusion and also crisis?
Thank you. No, very, very good approach. And Ron, what do you think about the regulation? We need more? We need less?
Oh, I don't think you'd hear me say we need more regulation in the U.S., but
We're sure about that.
I guess, but a couple things. We do here in the U.S. we have a regulation called the Renewable Fuel Standard, and it's a regulation that requires a certain amount of renewable fuel be put in the fuel supply, and it's been a regulation that's been in existence for a number of years, and the original law specified how much of that renewable fuel had to be in the fuel supply each year, and that and those specific numbers actually end in 2022. And so one of the things we're looking at in a future regulation is what should the renewable fuel standard of the future look like, and how, and relating to previous remarks, if we're looking at a lower carbon fuel in the future, what are those options that we should be studying most and that we would support to the administration, that makes sense, that are those that that we could live with. And that ties into a little bit of what I mentioned earlier, where we're looking at all the different pathways and which of those might be the most viable based on our guiding our climate principles. So there are a number of fuels kind of related regulations that are on the books already that are going to be updated. And then, as I mentioned, at the various state levels, there are going to be specific state regulations coming, whether it's California, New York, New Jersey that I mentioned earlier, that are going to be pushing for either banning internal combustion engines or zero emission vehicle mandates, those kinds of things. So there are going to be a lot of those types of issues coming down the road. And API wants to, we support being at the table and being part of discussions of our lower carbon fuel future, and help shape the policies, that ultimately dictate what those regulations look like. The other aspect I'll mention is more from a worker standpoint, worker regulations. Here in the U.S., we have the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. You may heard of referred to as OSHA. And the current OSHA regulations already have in them what's called a general duty clause, where the employer has an obligation to provide a safe workplace. Well, that's obviously in COVID, that's taken on a new meaning. And how do you guarantee a safe workplace with people that may have been exposed to the virus and those kinds of things? So there have been a lot of guidance documents issued by OSHA, new policies, new standards put out that try to deal with how do you protect workers in the workplace given this new situation. And there may be either new regulations coming because of that. There are already some things being looked at the state level, for instance, requirements that employers report to the state if somebody has been exposed, and there's certain timing aspects to that. So we could see some things there. And also, we may see stepped up enforcement of the regulations from OSHA because they'll want to go in and check to make sure facilities, and this is not specific to refineries, this could include meatpacking plants or pharmaceutical companies. How is OSHA guaranteeing that those employers are providing a safe workplace? So in my view, there are kind of two aspects to it. There's the whole fuels world related to refining specifically, and then there's more potential regulation focusing on the worker themselves and how do employers guarantee a safe workplace.
Okay, John, do you have something to add here?
Well, in Europe, we're not short of regulation at all. Just a minute, can you just bear with me a second? We're not short of regulation at all. Europe is determined to be a climate leader, and that means that there has to be strong policy, because I think we would all understand without policy, petroleum would win and renewables would not be competitive. With crude at $40, with an oversupply of refining globally, without policy, petroleum would be the winner in markets. And so for Europe to meet its objectives, it will implement very strong policies. A lot of what Ron said actually is surprisingly similar to the challenges and the ideas that are going around in Europe. The next fuels regulation could be based on something like the RFS2, which is a volume mandate, or it could be something more based on a greenhouse gas reduction, more like a low carbon fuel standard. And that's a conversation we're having on behalf of the European industry with the European regulators right now. But I'll pick on one other thing that we think is progress that could be helpful to investors here, and that is to change the way fuel tax works. We have very high fuel taxes in Europe, probably over 100% of the value of the product today, significantly higher. And we have worked out that if you work that as a carbon price, it amounts to about 210 euros per ton of carbon, a really high carbon price. But it doesn't work exactly like a carbon price today. So the petroleum in the petrol pump is taxed at that rate, but so is the biofuel. Whereas if you go to electricity to put electricity into a car, none of it is taxed at all. And what we're saying is, at least on the liquid fuel, the renewable portion should be taxed at a lower rate or a zero rate. And that immediately provides a kind of a floor price or a boost to the value of the fuel, such that you can make an investment with a clear knowledge of a minimum income stream additional to the value of petroleum, a bit like a contract for difference or something like that. We are proposing that in Europe, that revision of fuel tax, and we've actually got quite a warm response. We think that will go through as an amendment, and that'll help the investments a lot. It's a key part of policy, putting a price on carbon that the customers can see and benefit from when they choose a renewable.
Yes, there are many things that we can put on the table here, including the debate between emissions and net emissions. That is something that's very important, at least in Spain. Luis, you want to say something here regarding regulation?
Yeah, very briefly, and probably building on what John has already mentioned. So in Spain, we are in the middle of the parliamentary debates for the new law on climate change and energy transition, and it's in support of very ambitious targets that we have as a country in terms of greenhouse gas reductions. I think that the Spanish government, is starting to look at the oil industry in Spain with different eyes. I think that they are seeing the announcements that we are making in Europe in terms of how we want to become as well net zero companies, and how we want to support the world to become net zero as well. And they are starting to see us not as part of the problem, but probably as part of the solution, in the sense that we can support the acceleration of CO2 reductions through our investments. So something that we have agreed very recently with the Spanish government is to create a refining roundtable in which we are going to be discussing how government can support our transformation into net zero companies. And it can be done through positive regulation that would be creating the right incentive to invest so that we can transform our refineries in net zero facilities, and we can have the confidence to make those investments as well. So I think that I can see definitely that we are working together in the case of Spain with the government in terms of having the right conversations and the right support. And very soon, in a few weeks' time, some of the Spanish refiners, they are going to be presenting their strategy. So I'm pretty sure that we are going to hear very soon about the investment plans. And if we can get the regulatory support from the government, I think that could be great in terms of supporting the energy transition for the country.
Okay, very good message. Thank you. Well, Pablo is telling to me that we have a few questions. So I would like to ask you the last question before opening the floor for the questions from the audience. It's regarding the refinery of the future. And we have been speaking for a long time on how it's going to be the refinery of the future, energy transition, efficiency, biofuels, hydrogen, many things. And my question is, do you think this COVID is going to change what we have been discussing during the last years about this kind of refinery? And don't forget to say something about digitalization. And I will ask you to be as brief as possible in order to have some time for the questions. And please, I don't know, probably Ron, would you want to start now?
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess the refinery of the future, I touched on a little bit earlier, but I think there'll be for decades to come, there'll still be a demand for for the traditional petroleum products, but also I have mentioned the renewable fuels piece of it and biofuels and I did mention California, and a couple of the refineries that are there, if you want to think about the refinery of the future, are converting to new renewable fuels plants. And through the U.S. overall, I think is looking at over 1 billion gallons per year of renewable fuels based on the 8 or so projects that have been announced. So it is. I think it is a sign that the refineries are being innovative and looking at what those future fuels look like, and where it makes sense, are looking to be the refinery of the future in those regards. There's also, it was mentioned about energy intensity index, and we're actually doing some work here at API with our members to see how the U.S. refineries stack up on energy efficiency with the rest of the world, and what would be viewed as kind of the best in class. A lot of progress has been made by the U.S. refineries on energy efficiency or energy intensity index, and so I think you'll see some of the refineries of the future, may look somewhat similar, but will be much more efficient, a lot lower emissions. At least here in the U.S., energy intensity is very closely linked to emissions, and so I think you'll see some of that, and then I think from a work standpoint, it was touched on earlier. I think just kind of the day-to-day within the refineries, you'll see more, and already are seeing more use of artificial intelligence and digitalization and machine learning, where the equipment is, automatically measuring pressure, temperature, processing to maximize optimize the refinery efficiency while making the system safer, minimizing downtime, things like that. Using analytics to predict predictive maintenance, things like that. So I think you're seeing a lot of that, which means that less workers are needed. So you're minimizing kind of that interaction of potential virus spreading and the COVID type interaction. And also, again, from the workers' perspective, moving much more towards virtual meetings, staff meetings, planning meetings, meetings with consultants and auditors. Some of that it's already moving more virtually. One thing I know that's really on the minds of the refiners is how you're going to manage turnarounds, and how do you do that when you have huge numbers of contractors coming in and using using artificial intelligence and using other analytical tools to try to figure out how to stage and separate out some of the tasks involved in a turnaround, such that you protect, again, back to the worker, that you protect the safety and the health of the workers.
Thank you, John. Would you give your idea about the refineries of the future? Should we change our mind about this or not?
Well, I think we're already starting to see a change, and it'll have to happen more, and to some extent faster as well. We're talking at a time with refining margins that are around zero. That's been talked already. But the demand in the future will be for new products that have got a low carbon or a zero carbon history and new ways of making them. And so the refinery itself, it's already a really valuable industrial site with big connections, a deep water port usually, big connections for gas, electricity, usually rail access, trucking access, pipeline access. And it's often in a site with lots of other industry around. We're going to need carbon capture and storage, carbon capture and utilization, turning the carbon into something else. We're going to need handling of hydrogen in the future, possibly supplying hydrogen to other industries, as well as receiving biomass and wastes. Refineries are valuable sites to do that, and it's not easy to find new sites for big industrial projects. So we see the refinery as the middle of a new form of cluster, creating new low carbon products, but also services around other industries. Now, let me just pick up one other thing. You mentioned digitization. One of the things that I've been talking with other industries is we realize that in the future, our products will all have to have a net carbon neutral signature. But if you're talking about jet fuel or steel or cement or fertilizer, they all do the same thing as the products today. You may not be able to tell the difference. The difference is the carbon history, the overall life cycle. We need carbon accounting that is robust, that the customers and the regulators can have confidence in. So when we say, here is our product to comply with this regulation and to offer for sustainable investment to customers that want to have a climate neutral signature overall, we need to have carbon accounting across everything that we do. That'll require the digital agenda and a lot of creativity as to how we make that work. So that's something else for us to work on.
Okay. Rush, Rush, do you have any different approach?
Uh, yes, Pedro, I would like to start with the digitalization. There is a lot of myth around digitalization. Everyone thinks that digitalization will replace human and perhaps the role of humans will be marginalized. Not so. In our humble opinion, digitalization will help the humans take better decisions. Human interface is vital and it will remain vital. What we need to do today is to get out of this syndrome of digitalization that it is going to collapse us, but it is in fact an opportunity. What today we are doing with the human intelligence and knowledge, perhaps partly it can be done by the digitalization. But then the other part, which is the decision making, the visionary, the imaginary part, that never will be replaced by digitalization. So the way going forward is we need to define our problem. We need to establish what is the value we want to get out of the digitalization. And then we need to combine both domain expertise of refining with the IR4 technologies knowledge, and then gain the deeper human insights into the operation. And with that insight, let the operator take a better decision, which will help them reduce their operating cost, take a better predictive maintenance and decisions. And I can tell you that some of the initiatives in the GCC are going to help pave the way for the digitalization in a big way. One of them is ADNOC, and G42, Group 42 company has established a joint venture called AIQ in the city of Abu Dhabi, and they are going to do an R&D and come out with the AI based products for the oil and gas industry. Similarly, Saudi Aramco has made a IR4 center for the entire, the upstream and downstream and midstream operations, where they will be doing the research and coming out with their product for the digitalization. So some of those thoughts, I could say, are the initiatives. And under GDA umbrella itself, we have just 1 month ago established a digitalization technical committee where we have experts from all our GCC NOC companies, and we are adding more members into this committee from the technology providers, solution providers, so that they can come together, brainstorm on how to make best use of the digitalization. I will move towards the future of the refining. I see the refining must be integrated with petrochemical. The future is that more and more refining will feed into petrochemical. The middle distillate, the naphtha will have to be sent more and more to the petrochemical, which is still has a rising demand. And also within the refinery, as you might be knowing, that 15% of the CO2 emission globally comes from the oil and gas operations. How can we make that zero? I heard that net carbon zero operations of the refinery, that probably is going to happen, and many refineries are taking steps on that. There are almost no plant, no new project without a flare gas recovery unit. This is like a must for every plant. Now, the other thing is operational excellence will become the overarching umbrella for all operations in all refineries. And this is going to be the future. And never forget circular economy. And an example I can give you: in Saudi Aramco, they have a patented technology for coverage polypropylene carbonate polyol product line, which converts the CO2 into cleaner, high value material and improve carbon footprint, such as adhesive, sealant, and elastomer applications. And such applications will happen more and more, and this will fuel into the economy. So what we call a waste will become a wealth. And biofuel is going to be another attraction from agriculture waste and reused cooking oil. I know many refineries in India, they are already utilizing their existing unit to process these feed. And uh, one example, if I give you, perhaps you might laugh. Rolls-Royce, you must have heard, is now producing or has been producing royal honey from their large assets, area from where they can produce this honey. This shows another way our infrastructure, our assets are huge. Can we utilize them to diversify our operations? Can we go radically different to sustain? And last but not the least, the human. We need to reskill and upskill. We need to bring them to the level of new technology which they will be utilizing in the future. Soft skill is no longer soft. It is now the new hard skill. And with that, I would say we need to develop a lot of not best practices, but next practices. Best practices always look backward. Next practices will look forward. And we need a lot of next practices.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. And Luis, one last statement for this before the questions, because we are very bad on the agenda.
No, thank you, Pedro. I'll be very brief. Probably to share a couple of insights or lessons learned from COVID in relation with digital and also in relation with the refinery of the future. So I think that we've taken many lessons from COVID, but one of them is that in the refineries we can do many more things remotely than what we were used to. We were used to go to the refinery every day and do a lot of things in there. And I think that technology is allowing us to perform many tasks remotely, particularly around data management. So I think that digitization as a first step, coupled with artificial intelligence, they are likely to change refinery operations. And that will help to get further efficiency, reliability, plant optimization. So this is something that it was probably going to happen in any case, but the experience of remote working at the time of COVID might be accelerating this trend. And then the second reflection on COVID and the refinery of the future. I think that one of the things that COVID has reminded ourselves as well is that the world is long in refining capacity, and it is going to become longer in the future. So we've been talking for many years that refining strategy was about the last man standing. And I think that in the future, it's not going to be only about reaching the lowest possible cost break-even. I think the future is going to be reaching that lowest possible cost break-even, including as well the cost of becoming a net zero refinery, particularly if that refinery is based in Europe.
Okay, thank you. I think it has been a very interesting discussion, and I want to thanks to all of you for these important ideas. But I think we must have at least 5 to 10 more minutes in order to answer some of the questions. But Pablo, I will ask for your wisdom to pick those that are much more important. Please, would you launch to our speakers 2 or 3 key questions of those that we have received? And after that, I will give the floor to our speakers for a last 1 minute idea in order to close the session. Pablo.
Okay, great, Pedro. Thank you very much. I've selected a question for each one of you, so it's going to be fast. Luis.
You have 2 minutes at the maximum.
Okay. Luis, you've already talked about this. They're asking you about the outlook for the refining industry in Spain with more demanding environmental policies like the climate law. You spoke about this. They're asking you if there's any risk for the industry being mobilized to other countries. And they're also asking you if the refining industry can be an important element in reactivating the economy after COVID-19. Go ahead, Luis.
Yeah, no, thank you very quickly. Well, we have some of the most competitive refineries in Europe. They are based in Spain. And that's the testament of all the investments that as an industry we've been making in the last few years. I've already been mentioning that. So I think that we have a very strong position in order to sustain those refineries in the future. But I firmly believe that those refineries that will be sustainable in the future, they need to become net zero refineries. So we need to have the framework in the countries. We need to work together with the government, and I think that the willingness to work together is there. We need to take advantage of this refining roundtable that has been created in order to support all the investments that we need to make in order to transform the refining industry in Spain. I think the willingness from the companies is there, and I think that if we are able to develop this positive environment from a regulation point of view, I think that we are planting the seeds really to transform our industry in Spain.
Okay, thank you very much, Luis. Ron, they're asking you about if a change of president in the US can have an impact of somehow an effect in the downstream industry.
Good question.
Yeah, I thought that might come up. Yeah, I think mainly fuels oriented, but and I've kind of touched on it. But the Biden clean energy plan lays out potential policies related, for instance, EV tax credits, having all the federal government vehicles be electric vehicles and not internal combustion. EV charging station investments, 500,000 charging stations, and then another policy is to convert all the school buses in the U.S. to zero emission vehicles. So those are some of the things on the fuel side that obviously will impact refineries that are part of the Biden clean energy plan. And then, as you might imagine, there are a host of environmental air, water, waste kind of regulations that will have an impact too. But we're focused on those transportation ones that I just covered briefly there.
Okay, thanks very much, Ron. Raj, you've also talked about this during the conversation. They're asking you how much of the reduction in production of refining will become structural and will not come back. And they're asking you, will we see production coming back to 2019 levels?
First of all, great question. As I mentioned to you that we are making investment. We have made investment already, which will increase the refining capacity. Yes, there is no place for those refineries who are not flexible, who cannot process the bottom of the barrel. They will disappear. But those who are built on modern standards with a lot of energy efficiency and zero emissions, those refineries will survive. And we expect that the production back to the level of 2019 perhaps come by the middle of next year. That's our hope. And we wish that the demand will catch up with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raj. And John, last question. They say, we've heard about cancellations or postponement of project upgrades in refinery, mainly dealing with CO2 reduction programs. Do you have an idea of the future development of these projects? Do you think we will see an improvement of the project plans and executions? What's your view on this?
Short term, I think it will be maybe difficult for many European refiners to start projects. Having said that, there are some announcements already. There are some announcements that in terms of CCS projects, green hydrogen projects, etc. In order to meet objectives for 2030, there will need to be more investments. I think everybody's trying to look for when the pandemic actually starts to turn and demand comes back to get certainty. But my view is that there will have to be projects. There are many plans being looked at. It may just be that right now, in November 2020 is not quite the time to get them signed off. People really want to see the beginning of some improvement in the market. So that's my view. Those projects will be there, certainly in Europe.
Okay, thank you very much, John. Okay, Pedro, so we're done with the questions there.
Yeah. I would love to spend here more time speaking with you because it's a very, very interesting conversation, and it's not easy to have so good, important speakers speaking about all of these kind of things. But before closing, I would like to give you 1 minute to every one of you to send the last message to all the people that are listening to us. And I would like to have some kind of good message for the future. But anyway, it's your time. I don't know the order here. Luis, would you start here?
I'm happy to start, Pedro, with some Spanish flavor. So three messages in 1 minute. Message number one, I think that in Spain, from 2015 to 2019, we were living under the illusion of stable prices between $50 and $70 per barrel, steady demand recovery, and healthy refining margins. And I think that COVID is telling us that that's not going to be the case any longer. Second message is that as the world is transitioning to low carbon energy and the demand for oil decreases, the value of the demand shorts, the pockets of demand for refiners will increase. So the value of the integrated strategies between refining and marketing is going to be higher and higher in the future. And the final one is that I have tremendous confidence in the resilience of our industry and our capacity to reinvent ourselves to net zero.
Thank you. John, what about your last message?
Thank you, Pedro. So actually, it's quite similar to what Luis said, and let me go a little further. Our industry exists because the world wants liquid energy, and we've shown that liquid energy is simply the best form of energy storage and delivery, ideally suited for transport. And we know that other things will come as well. Electrification will be major, hydrogen will be major, but liquids will still have a place. We've shown that we can separate petroleum from the concept of a liquid. It'll be gradual, but the technology exists, and actually the policies exist as well now. They're coming forward to enable us to do this. It's very large, it's very ambitious, but the world will need us to do that. Europe is asking us to go first with that, but that's our challenge. I do believe we can do it, and I think we'll play an important role in society and industrial transformation and transport transformation as we do it. Thanks.
Ron, please.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, just high-level messages to close out the webinar. As I mentioned earlier, the U.S. oil and gas industry, and in fact the global industry, is very resilient and has survived these boom-bust cycles before. Our industry will make it through this pandemic and will continue to provide clean, safe, affordable, and readily available products to consumers for decades to come. I think we're recognizing today that journey will not be easy, with many challenges ahead, but for those refiners that continue to operate, it'll be those that can successfully manage COVID-19 impacts in the short term and a lower carbon future long term in the most efficient and effective ways. In my view, the bottom line is adapt, innovate, and survive.
Rush, please, your last message.
Thank you, Pedro. In my opinion, refining industry will continue to play a very important role and major role in supplying and meeting the demand of energy. However, we need to utilize fullest the CCUS technology and efficient operations to coexist and compete with the alternative energy. There is no reason why we cannot produce a liquid petroleum-based product which is, if not better, equal to the alternative energy with the technology. The second message which I would like to give is our human capability must be equipped with skills which will allow them to take decisions best suited for them, and that will require mental resilience. Our academics, our institutions, our society will have to do a lot of work on that. I have already mentioned the young generations, young minds, which will enter the work life in 10 years from now, will need to be built based on those requirements. And my last message is a quote from Dan Millman, who is the author of Way of the Peaceful Warrior and also the protagonist of the movie. He says the secret to change is to focus all your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. Let's focus all our energy on building the new. Thank you.
So thank you very much. It's time to close. I have said that I would love to spend more time here, but it's not the case. But let me say also my message, if you don't mind, is that I agree with you. I think that our oil and gas companies have been delivering energy for more than 100 years and taking care of our consumers and creating welfare. So that means we are going to be part of the solution in the next years. And because we are very good in innovation, technology, and resilience. We are very resilient. So my message is that we will be in the future, in whatever the kind of future that we have to expect. So this is the end. Thank you very much first to all of the people that have been joining us and listening to our speakers. Also to our speakers, thank you, Ron, Raj, John, and Luis. And please let me take this opportunity to say that you are going to be invited for the real. We think that it's going to be real, not virtual, expert workshop next June in Spain. And also, I would like to thank our sponsors and all the team in the Spanish Energy Club that they have been working very hard to make this possible. And of course, my last thanks is for our distinguished president of the Spanish Energy Club. Thank you, Mavi, for joining us and launch this discussion. It's very inspiring for us to have you on board and trying to help in all the activities of the Spanish Energy Club, and especially for the Spanish National Committee of the WPC. And also thank you, Tor, for joining us and launch the discussion too with your inspiring words. It's a pleasure to have all of you on board. And hopefully we will be able to have the real edition of this expert workshop in June next year in Spain, and probably not virtual. So thank you very much. Take care of yourselves and keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pedro.
Thank you.